Hello, everybody. So this is a recording of the Indo-Zambia Bank training program. The training program was organized by the compliance department of the bank, and it focuses on the role of financial institutions in combating human trafficking and illegal wildlife trade. My name is Patrick Karamba. I am the Chief Executive of Karamba Advisory Services. I am subject matter expert on enterprise risk management as well as AML CFTP risks. As you know, AML CFTP risks are part of the enterprise risks that the bank focuses on overall. Now, this is the agenda. We'll walk through six different parts, and each part has several slides that we'll walk through. Now, to begin with, the question is why should the bank focus on financial flows from human trafficking? The answer to that question is that Financial Action Task Force report of July 2018 on human trafficking indicates that this is becoming a huge problem globally, and it's exposing the global financial system to tremendous risks because of the billions of US dollars that are emanating from this illegal activity and flowing through the financial institutions. So financial institutions need to protect themselves from sort of the toxic money that is coming from 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 these activities. Now, why should we listen to the Financial Action Task Force? We should listen because it's an intergovernmental body. Even Zambia is part of it. And the recommendations that these guys make become the gold standard, become international best practice. So we are advised as financial practitioners or financial operators to sort of heed the recommendations of the Financial Action Task Force on human trafficking, meaning we must report, we must put in place policies, processes, and procedures for reporting suspicious transactions with respect to human trafficking. So, what is human trafficking, if you may ask? Human trafficking is a process of people being recruited in their community or in their country, and they're recruited and then transported to a different place where they are exploited for forced labor, for prostitution, domestic servitude, and other forms of exploitation. But the three main sort of exploitation areas are sexual exploitation, which constitutes about 50% of those that are trafficked. There is forced labor and, of course, domestic servitude. Now, how do we identify what human trafficking is? There are three factors we use to identify. There is the process, the means, and the purpose. With the process involves recruiting, involves transporting or transferring, it involves harboring, it involves receipt of persons. Now, with the means, okay, when you are recruiting and transporting and harboring these people and receiving these people, you can use force, you can make threats, coercion, or fraud, or you can deceive these people. We see that people are sometimes deceived to say, for example, we can transport you to South Africa, there are good jobs in South Africa, there is this place where you will work, and this person is ready to finance your trip, your passport, and everything. And once you get there, you find it's a whole different scenario, and you are put in a brothel to work, and you are sexually exploited in that fashion. Now, the purpose is, of course, prostitution and other forms of sexual exploitation. We've talked about forced labor, slavery, involuntary servitude, and, of course, removal of organs. You may be transported to a different location just to find that you are missing an organ. Now, there is a marked difference between migrant smuggling and human trafficking. With so there are certain factors that we use to differentiate the two. One are the actions. Now, meaning the process. So it's the process of recruiting, transporting, and harboring and receiving these people for certain for exploitation, and we've seen the different types of exploitation that these victims of trafficking are put into. But with migrant smuggling, okay, what it is the procurement of illegal entry of the person into another country. And the other thing is transnationality. The other factor is transnationality. Whereas in migrant smuggling, one has to move from one country to another. With human trafficking, that is not necessary. You may be trafficked within the same country, moved from one district to another, from one region to another. And then where consent of the trafficked or smuggled person is concerned, with human trafficking, uh, when the means are established, and the means we talked about force, using threats, using cohesion, okay, deception. When the means when the means are established, consent, whether consent of the victim is irrelevant in this case. And consent, where children are involved, it doesn't matter because, of course, they've got no legal, they have not attained legal age to make their own decisions, per se. But with migrant smuggling, you have a situation where the smuggled person consents to smuggling. And then the purpose, of course, with these guys, we talked about the exploitation areas to which they are taken. And with migrant smuggling, it's literally cash per se. So all human trafficking and migrant smuggling, of course, these are businesses. They are there for financial gain. But with migrant smuggling, you'll find that the smuggler will obtain cash in advance. Whereas with human trafficking, the cash may come during the process of exploiting the victim. Now let us look at some statistics of human trafficking. So the percentage share of detected victims of trafficking in persons by age group and gender. So you will find that women constitute 46%, they are the largest. Children, girls are at 15%, men at 20%. Now, with respect to percentage share of factors that traffickers take advantage of, they take advantage of the poverty of the people, of the victims. They take advantage of the children coming from dysfunctional families are more likely to run away from home, are more likely to fall prey to deception. So you will find that these two factors, dysfunctional families and economic need, constitute more than 50% of the factors that the traffickers take advantage of when they are recruiting these people. Now, of course, there are other factors that come into migration status, for example. You may be an illegal in the US, for example, and you may find that you will you will do anything to gain a living, so you may be exploited in that form. Now, also, percentage share of forms of exploitation amongst trafficked people, you will find that sexual exploitation constitutes about 50%, and forced labor constitutes 38%. You find that these two are over 80%, almost 90% of areas of exploitation, forced labor and sexual exploitation. Now, the industries that use forced labor are one, domestic work. These are servants in the homes. You have the construction industry, construction sites like the World Cup. Before the World Cup, Qatar was a construction site per se, uh, workers around the world moved to Qatar to work. Now, the invisibility of, 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 of persons working in these sectors, the fishing sector, the agriculture sector, the hotels and restaurants are also used. They want cheap labor in order to maintain, to put a cap on the costs. And of course, the garment industry, the mining industry, other industries like the entertainment industry, for example, they would want to use cheap labor. Now, the structure of the traffickers themselves is such that you will have individual traffickers. There are opportunistic associations of two or three people. You have business enterprise type of organized criminal groups, and also you have governance type organized criminal groups. Now, these are institutions with corporate governance structures in them. Um, the human trafficking, according to a report of 2015, is a 150 billion US dollar industry. Now, you can imagine with such amount of money, uh, people are ready to die for those kinds of money. I mean, companies may be swayed from their legal businesses to get into, to get a chunk of that, of those billions of dollars. Now, the percentage share of the perpetrators of trafficking, you will find that the business type organized criminal groups have got the largest share, estimated at around 57%. And then you have the governance type. Individuals constitute a small percentage of 11%. But when you look at the trends in terms of the demographics of the victims, you will find that women, the trend in the number of women that are trafficked is going lower, whereas the trend in girls, in men, in boys is going up. With respect to men, you can imagine that perhaps these are being channeled into the construction industry. Even boys may be channeled, not only the construction industry, but into forced labor. But with girls, we can imagine where they are going. The industries that are more likely to accept girls are the entertainment industries, the domestic maid industry, so to say. Now, the number of detected victims in 2021 in Southern Africa, we had about over 200 women were sort of victims of trafficking. 66 were men, 62 were girls and sisters. Now, these are just records of those that were caught. Imagine the number of traffic victims that went undetected. Now, the percentage share of detected victims of trafficking by age group, you will find that women are around 27%, girls are around 32%. Now, let us speak about why the bank should focus on financial flows from the illegal wildlife trade. Now, the bank should focus on illegal wildlife trade because of a report, because of the recommendations of the Financial Action Task Force, and in their report of June 2020, they have put up recommendations to the effect that financial institutions the world over must put in place policies, procedures and processes to reasonably protect the bank from risks that coming from financial flows from IWT, meaning illegal wildlife trade. Now, let us speak about illegal wildlife trade supply chain. Now, we have a legal supply chain for wildlife. You can, as a business, obtain a license to trade in wildlife, or you may decide to be an illegal one. But with the legal channel, this is what happens. You can legally harvest wildlife. And after it is legally harvested, uh, the supply chain is that the wildlife moves into breeding. Uh, there are some who are breeding wildlife. For example, the current president of South Africa and the buffaloes that he is breeding, that he is reported to have sold to some Sudanese. So he is in the business of breeding buffaloes. Now, such animals can be harvested and taken to its breeding place. Now, there are also local retail sales that have licenses to engage in this kind of business. Of course, in this country, Zawa are the people from whom you would get that kind of a license. Now, after the harvest of wildlife, they can get into the breeding places or into local retail sales, and then they are transported to wholesale traders, and then finally to the source. Now, what we have the source area where the wildlife or wildlife products are coming from, and then we have the destination area where they are coming from. Now, from the source area, if you see the typology that we have here of the supply chain, with the illegal part, you will have poachers. Poachers uh, will poach, they will take their illegal products to book runners, or they are brokers in this illegal trade. They are intermediaries from the source side in this illegal trade. On the source side, there are exporters and importers, there are intermediaries. And so, for example, in Zambia, okay, there are certain animals that we do not have, and animals can, there are certain people that can import illegally those kinds of wildlife products that we do not have in the country. Wildlife or wildlife products. So the vulnerabilities here are such that, for example, uh, vulnerability number one is that a poacher can easily supply to a breeding place. Also, the book runners, after they buy from the poacher, they can even supply to the breeding collection, or to the breeding, to those businesses that breed wildlife, or they can easily sell that to local retail sales. Now, vulnerability number three is that this can move to intermediaries, and intermediaries can easily transport this. From the illegal channel, intermediaries can find a way of taking this into the legal channel and putting it through to wholesale traders, and finally to the destination retail. There is also vulnerability number three. Exporters can actually also. So, the main thing with this, when you look at the illegal supply chain and the legal supply chain, there are leakages from the illegal supply chain that can move into the legal supply chain, and therefore obscuring the fact that these animals were poached in the first place, or these wildlife products are coming from, from, from the illegal side of things. That is the main danger. And there are about seven sort of leakages, or places where, vulnerabilities. There are about seven vulnerabilities in the supply chain that we can see illegal wildlife trade coming into the legal side, unknowingly that could happen. Now, this slide is showing the vulnerabilities in the wildlife supply chain, and we spoke about that. If you want to follow through with respect to the vulnerabilities, you can check that. Now, we have discussed an overview, or sort of an introduction of what human trafficking and illegal wildlife trade is. Now, let us talk about the internal controls for different types of traffickers. What you must keep in mind is what you have is customers. Now you have got different type of customers. The focus of the bank is to risk assess the customers and put in place controls. Controls in what sense? Controls in the sense of uh, uh, should we focus on the transactions of customer A or should we focus on the transactions of customer B? How much focus should we put on monitoring transactions of customer A? How much focus should we put? I mean, we cannot put heightened focus on all of our customers. We must apply what is called a risk-based approach to monitoring the transactions of the customers so that we can effectively report suspicious transactions to the Financial Intelligence Center Act as according to Section 29 of the Act. Now, the legal framework is such that the Financial Intelligence Center uh, uh, is asking us to put a lead on compliance risk. Risk number 5, if you see on the side of the Financial Intelligence Center. And other regulators such as the Bank of Zambia and the PIA. Uh, so a bank is exposed to several risks, including risk number 5, compliance risk, which is the subject of this discussion. Now, on the other side, we have the bank itself. The bank must have a risk appetite framework. So, for example, with the risk appetite framework, we would expect a risk appetite statement for credit risk, a risk appetite statement for market, for operational, for all of the risks that the bank is exposed to. A risk appetite for compliance risk would be something like the bank has a low risk appetite for compliance risk. The bank, Indo-Zambia Bank, has a moderate risk appetite for compliance risk. Now, this means that with a risk appetite statement, when you say low, you mean that each customer that you risk assessed must have low risk or must have moderate risk and so on. If you do not have appetite for customers that are high risk, it simply means that at onboarding you reject to onboard them. We had a discussion some time back to say if a bank rejects my application to open up an account, can I sue? Well, that is a topic for another day. Now, the Financial Intelligence Center Act requires us to have a compliance policy. So whether we have a low risk appetite or moderate risk or high risk, we need to put up a compliance policy. And this is what will inform the practices of you guys in the bank. What do you do at any step as you carry out your functions? Now, you will see that, let's go back to this slide. You will see that the Financial Intelligence Center has sliced and diced what we call the compliance program into 16 parts. However, what compliance policy and compliance program are the same thing. These 4 parts, according to international best practice, there are 4 components of a compliance program. Well, there are 16 components of a compliance policy as according to the Financial Intelligence Center. But this is just the same thing. What you find in, as I said, sliced and diced, whereas what you will find in internal controls really is what you will find in them. Now, let us speak about the definition of money laundering. So with money laundering is that there has to be, you must commit an offense, a criminal offense, for example. It may be human trafficking, it may be illegal wildlife trade, it may be murder. You obtain money from such kind of an activity and then you put it in the bank and then you put it in the financial system. Now, the act of putting money in the financial system is money laundering. Now, money laundering can mean three things. There is a point at which you are placing the money, the point you are depositing the money into the bank. You can perform several complicated transactions to obscure the source of that money. We can get the same money. We can have a fake contract with our sister company in the Cayman Islands. We can transfer that money to the Cayman Islands. That is part of layering. We can have another contract with another company in the US. We can transfer that money to the US. That money can be found in Hong Kong. That money can be found through several transactions, and that money can come back to Zambia. And ultimately, if you want to follow the money trail, it's going to be very hard for you to sort of find out. Now, one of the questions that came up was that as banks, we are complying. It looks like this compliance thing with money laundering is window dressing and all that. Well, it is not window dressing. As a matter of fact, money laundering is a sophisticated crime, especially when layering is concerned. That is why it is difficult to prosecute cases of money laundering. You can imagine you will have to go to Cayman Islands and talk to the authorities there to establish how this money moves. You've got to go to the US, you've got to go to Hong Kong, you've got to go, I don't know, God knows where else this money has been moved around before it came back to Zambia, and then you gather the whole evidence to say this was the case and this is the money. The money can be lost in a series of transactions. This is the layering part. The integration part is when that money, that dirty money, that toxic money finally finds itself buying a house, buying an asset. It may be a financial asset, it may be real estate, it may be any other property, and nobody knows that that is dirty money. That is full integration. So money laundering can be these three things, and these three things can happen simultaneously or they can happen separately. Now, about the predicate crimes, the first crimes that you commit to get money before you deposit that, there is an array of these cases, of these crimes. It may be cybercrime, for example. It may be extortion, it may be fraud, smuggling, and so on and so forth. But remember, human trafficking is one of the serious cases that the Financial Action Task Force has recommended that financial institutions focus on. And financial institutions specifically create policies, processes, and procedures for mitigating this risk. Now, the risk of illegal wildlife trade and the risk of money laundering coming from illegal wildlife trade and money laundering coming from human trafficking can come about at the bank because of your different type of customers, because of your different types of products, or because of the different geographical locations where your customers come from. Now, we're still talking about internal controls. Now, here is a risk assessment model that is part of internal controls. Internal controls, what we mean when we say internal controls, we mean section 16 to 19 of the Financial Intelligence Center Act. What we mean when we say internal controls, we mean KYC policy. And KYC policy, essentially, so KYC policy, you have the anti-money laundering policy, which is an all-embracing umbrella. And then KYC policy is a component in that anti-money laundering policy. Now, KYC policy is essentially account opening procedures, identity verification procedures, and customer risk assessment procedures. So with the account opening procedures, we know there is the form. The procedure is that there is certain information that we need to collect from the customer before we onboard that customer onto our customer portfolio. Now we collect that information for process when we verify. When we collect that information, we need to verify that information. Of course, there are ways we verify. With respect to the identity, we will contact the identity issuing authorities for verification and so on and so forth. If you are a friend, we'll contact PAPRA. If you're an individual, if it's a national registration card, if it's a passport, we will contact the issuing authority for authentication. Now, after we collect that information is fed into the risk assessment model so that we can risk assess you. We can say this customer, we have to understand whether your transaction should be monitored vigorously, or your transaction should be, because when we're monitoring transactions, these are resources. We should apply more resources to high risk customers and less resources to less risk customers. So what we have here is that we mentioned that different types of customers exposes the bank to risk, and different types of products and services exposes the bank to risk. The information that we will collect at onboarding during account opening procedures, we want to understand your source of funds. We want to understand your integrity, your honest integrity and reputation, the purpose of the account. We want to understand from which economic sector you're coming from, and so on and so forth. Now, with respect to the products, one client can access one product of the bank, or they can access different products of the bank. But here's the thing: the products have in them risks that anti-money laundering risks. Certain products are more prone to be used by money launderers because of the nature of their products. It may be difficult to detect that this is a money laundering transaction, and so on and so forth. So there are risk factors that we use to sort of measure the riskiness of a product. There are risk factors that we use to measure the riskiness of a customer. Now, human traffickers are customers of the bank. Illegal wildlife traders are customers of the bank. This is where this comes up. So, with the different types of customers, we've got individuals or natural persons, we've got politically exposed persons, we've got business entities that are legal persons, we've got non-bank financial institutions, professional service providers, and so on and so forth. Now, what we want to do here is that with the information that we collect, we want to establish where this customer is a low-risk customer, medium-risk customer, or high-risk customer. Now, there are different components, or there are different risk factors, or there are different risk components, okay, that we may need to score in order to arrive at the riskiness of the customer. So let us look at natural persons, for example. So with natural persons, we have the source of funds. Okay. So at onboarding, this guy comes or this lady comes and say, okay, I'm an individual, I'm an employee, and my source of funds is a salary. That is fine. I'm a businessman. I run a small business, and the business is my source of funds. That is fine. So we may be able to readily identify that, of course, this is the source of funds, or maybe we cannot. The question will be, where can we not identify? Somebody says he runs a small restaurant at a certain area, in a certain area, and then he tells you he's going to be banking $1 million in a month. I mean, that will kind of be hard for the bank to sort of stomach, in which case that is a red flag, and that would be a high risk scenario when the reported source of funds is not consistent with sort of the industry from where that gentleman is coming from or lady is coming from. With the risk score for honesty, integrity, and reputation, this we may want to look at the court records, we may want to look at the police records. The compliance department must have access to some of these records, and of course, so if there is no record of conviction of financial crime, that would be low risk, and high risk would be if there is conviction. But in this case, you may have been investigated but not convicted, but we will give you a benefit of the doubt and we will say, we'll give you a moderate risk in that case. So we will take these two components. Now, the financial products that you are accessing, you may access one financial product or three financial products from the bank. We will risk rate all the financial products there and come up with an average. When we say internal control, the internal control is informed by the Financial Intelligence Center Act. If you are high risk, we will apply special account surveillance as according to Section 19 for high risk customers. Now, Section 19 for high risk customers has prescribed an array of things that we need to do. We may have to ask for your audited financial statements if you are deemed high risk customer. We may have to ask for your largest customers, your largest suppliers, and other information that the Act is telling us that we need to get from. If you are a low risk customer, we will apply standard account surveillance as according to Section 22. So now you understand why risk, why we must approach transaction monitoring in a risk-based, on a risk-based basis. Imagine if we had to collect financial statements from all the customers of the bank and analyzing those financial statements, the kind of resources we would require for that. So we only need to sort of focus on only high risk customers, and then we optimize the bank's resources in that way. For prominent influential persons, these are sometimes previously referred to as politically exposed persons. Now, politically exposed persons are the executive in government, the administration in government, meaning directors in the ministries, the high-ranking officials in the judiciary, we may say judges, high-ranking officials in the military, we may say colonel going on, high-ranking officials in state-owned enterprises, we may say the NAPSAs, and so on and so forth. Now, the ZESCOs and so on and so forth. Now, we add their close associates, their siblings, their parents, their spouses, their children. So you see the whole universe, I mean, it's so huge, and this is a bit problematic for the bank. How would you know that this is a close associate of a director in the Ministry of Local Government when this person comes to open up a bank account? And at onboarding, you're not going to be asking these people to say, hey, kindly indicate whether or not you are a close associate of the following people. I mean, it could be like you are prying too hard into the privacy of individuals. We had a debate over this, but it's a topic for another time. So if we can't ask those questions, then it puts more pressure on the bank to kind of do more research to try to establish, to understand it. Now, we may want to use social media resources, we may want to use other resources, including what we call the deep web, to establish to get more information as much as we can. Your IT guys can tell you how to get to the deep web. I have a software myself here on this laptop I'm using to get to the deep web. Instead of using the browser called for Firefox, you want to use Chrome, you use a browser called TRO, the Tor browser, and then there are also, with the Tor browser, you can access other browsers that can take you to the deep web, to the dark web, or whatever that is called. Now, you may want to use that information because the information you get on Google, the information you get, we are told that 95% of the data is in the deep web. The information we're exposed to with the Googles and the Yahoos is just about 5% of the total information that you can get. So imagine, we can find out if we want to find certain information about certain people. Now, let us look at the composite rating. Now, for prominent influential persons, there is only one rating across the world. They are rated high risk, and as such, we apply Section 19 of the Financial Intelligence Act. Now, let us look at embassies and foreign consulates. Well, embassies can be used as a conduit for crime. You are told that when the president of China, Xi Jinping, went to visit South Africa, they were actually rhino horns. They were actually elephant, the ivory that actually moved through the Chinese embassy and flew on the plane with the president to China. There is an Al Jazeera report to that fact. So embassies can be used as a conduit. Okay, whether that Al Jazeera report is true or not, that's besides the point. But what we're trying to say here is that the embassies can be used as conduits for crime. Now, we want to understand the purpose of the account. Is the embassy using this account for embassy business alone, or is it receiving money for and on behalf of nationals of the embassy? They may be working at the embassy, or they may not be working at the embassy. And then if that's the case, then this is a high-risk scenario because essentially the bank is doing business with people that it does not know. How does the bank know that this is laundered money, and how does the bank sort of carry out a risk assessment? Now, if the account is being used both for embassy money, well, you may rate that moderate, in which case the velocity of funds, if there is too much money moving in and too much money moving out, or the moment the money moves in and fast moves out, the money moves in, that is velocity of funds, in which case that's not volume of activity. There's too much volume, too much money moving in and moving out. That would be the high-risk scenario. The geographical location, certain countries are deemed high risk by the Financial Action Task Force. So actually the Financial Action Task Force does evaluations of anti-money laundering regimes of countries, including Zambia. And though there are certain countries that have weak money laundering regulations, their financial institutions do not have adequate supervisory oversight by the supervisory authorities, central banks, for example. So in those cases, such countries are deemed high-risk countries. And we can just go to the Financial Action Task Force website and we'll be able to see. So if actually this country comes from such, if this embassy is for such a country, then it will be high risk. So we will rate these components, these three components, and of course the financial products. I mentioned earlier, the financial products may not be one, they may be more. We will rate the financial products as such. Now, when we do that, then the risk rating informs the kind of internal controls that we will apply. Non-bank financial institutions can open up an account at Indo-Zambia Bank. We want to know who the ultimate beneficial owner is. We do not want to know the ultimate beneficial owner for the sake of knowing the ultimate beneficial owner. What we want to do is to risk assess the UBO, and if the UBO is high risk, then the entity, whether it's a legal person, we will deem the entity as high risk. Now, some are easily identifiable and some are not. Also, we may want to risk assess the purpose of the account. Now, an example is, for example, Bayport opening up an account at the Indo-Zambia Bank, and then Bayport having to have customer money passing through that account at the Indo-Zambia Bank. Effectively, Indo-Zambia Bank will be sort of transacting monies for whom it does not know. That would be a high risk scenario. But if it's for monies that are solely for that belong to the non-bank itself, that's a low risk scenario. And if they are commingled, perhaps that would be moderate. Also, for a non-bank, you want to get an AML compliance policy, assess the AML compliance policy for adequate. So essentially, you are playing the role of the regulator here, because you're going to have to carry out an assessment of whether this AML policy of the non-bank is there or not. Now, is adequate or not? Now, there is also the geographical location. Some non-banks are foreign owned, and we want to understand from which countries they are coming from and whether these countries are low risk or high risk, as according to Financial Action Task Force information. Now, we will take the 4 components, we rate them, and of course, there's that the financial product or service, and then we will understand the internal controls that we must apply on this customer. So, understand this. Each customer may not have the same kind of internal control applied to the customer. They may be different. For professional service providers, these may be chartered accountants, there may be legal firms, there may be HR agencies, they may be other consultants, etc., etc. Professional service providers are deemed what we want to do is to understand the ultimate beneficial owner, and as I mentioned earlier, it's not just knowing who the UBO is. We want to do due diligence on the UBO so that we can understand whether this entity is high risk or not. Then the purpose of the account also. Some lawyers will have clients' money, some accountants can have clients' money pass through their accounts. We will want to understand. So this information, we must collect this information at onboarding. And of course, we monitor over time. Now, according to Financial Intelligence Center Act, professional service providers must have an AML compliance policy. So, what you want to do is to obtain an AML compliance policy of the law firms. If there are any law firms that are your clients in Indo-Zambia, please go and get their AML compliance policy, because they are mandated to have those policies. And you are mandated to get those policies and carry out an assessment as to whether they are adequate or inadequate. And if they are not adequate, please, you may want to advise your clients to sort of up their game and make those compliance policies, because they will feed into the risk assessment of these guys, and your risk appetite statement will dictate whether those accounts you need to have them or you need to close them. Now, the geographical locations, some of these professional service providers are from countries, outside countries, so you may want to establish the riskiness of the jurisdictions from where they're coming from. Now, you will have all those components, you rate them, and of course, the financial products that these guys are accessing. And the internal controls that you apply are informed by sections of the Financial Intelligence Center Act. With respect to NGOs, NGOs can be conduits for financial crime. You can find an NGO is operating in the villages not knowing that they are in cahoots with the poachers, for example, and are involved in illegal wildlife trade. So the issue of ultimate beneficial ownership comes into play. You want to understand the founders of this NGO. You risk assess them and establish whether they are high risk customers. And if they, I mean they are high risk, if they are in terms of AML, then the NGO is deemed high risk in terms of and then the donor base, you may want to understand their 10, their 20 largest donors. Then you risk assess their largest donors because also that will entail that largest donors may be in cahoots with with the NGO and so on and so forth. But then the geographical location where the NGO originates from also you will risk assess that, and you will have an average of that and understand the internal controls that you need to apply. With a business entity, of course, you want to understand, of course, the ultimate. So the issue of ultimate beneficial ownership on any legal person comes into play. It's one of the issues that the Financial Action Task Force laments on. It has become international best practice to establish who the UBOs of our clients are, and of course, to risk assess the UBOs themselves. Now, the geographical location for a business entity, of course, comes into play. You have an average of, you have those components, and you understand the internal controls that need to go. Now, you have also cash-intensive businesses. These are restaurants, supermarkets, petrol stations, etc. So you want to understand the ultimate beneficial ownership. You want to understand the geographical location where this firm originates. But with cash-intensive businesses, there is also the aspect of consistency of transactions. I mean, uh, a restaurant based in, for example, a restaurant based in Shangombo cannot be depositing the same amount of money as Chicago's, for example. Okay. So there would be no consistency because of location, because so it can be in the same city. The Chicago's cannot be depositing the same amount of money. For those that are not in Lusaka, Chicago's is a high-end restaurant located at East Park Mall in Lusaka on Great East Road. But you can have a restaurant in, for example, I want to mention, because you can have a restaurant in Matero and it can deposit the same amount of money as Chicago, because you never know the amount of revelers that are going there. But I want to say, for example, a restaurant, town center, for example, okay, or a restaurant, a small restaurant on Cairo Road. So you understand what we mean by consistency of transactions. You will want to look at the location and see, okay, if it's a retail shop, okay, if it's whatever business entity that is, so long as it's cash intensive. Here, the danger is funds generated from criminal activities can be put in the till and deposited together as funds coming from legitimate business. And this is why we want to understand the consistency of transactions in this case. So we have to do that, and then come up with that. Mind you, with human trafficking, we can have funds that are we can be running a nightclub. In that nightclub, we have sexual workers in there who have been trafficked, and then the monies that we are getting from that business of exploiting sexual workers, we are putting that money together with the gate takings, together with the bar takings, together with the other takings, and then we are depositing that money and saying this is legitimate business. So that's why we need to understand. If it's North Mid area in Lusaka, we want to understand, we can do some research and understand the amount of takings of all the nightclubs there, and then we will compare with yours. We can also do an analysis of your kind of regulars, for example, and so on and so forth. So, in any case, you want to risk assess, you want to risk assess your customers because the human traffickers may be your customers, because the illegal wildlife traders may be your customers in this sense. So the internal controls that you have for every customer will inform the practices, as in will help the bank to mitigate the risks that are coming from financial flows from trafficking. Now, when we get to risk assessing human trafficking, we will see, and when we and IWT, we will see what that means. Now, internal controls for financial products. I will walk through quickly through these slides because the same concept of risk assessing risk factors for customers apply to this. But understand this: every financial product, okay, every customer comes to the bank to access certain financial product. So as we are assessing the risk factors for that customer, there is also that element of the product. We need to risk assess that product in terms of how easily it is to be exploited by traffickers. So let us look at an array of the risk factors. So we have an array of products that the bank provides, and then we have an array of factors that we need to look at. So here is what happens. For example, expected versus actual transactions. So we may record that onboarding the expected transactions. Account opening procedures, usually when you're opening up an account in the form, you will find you are being asked how much money do you expect to transact. Now, we may find that actual transactions are far much more higher than the expected transactions, and that would signify a high risk. Now, this is why this risk assessment has to be ongoing. This is what it means when in the financial controls, for example, let me take you back here. Look at this. A risk score of 1, meaning low risk. Standard account surveillance as according to section 22. So we will keep your records for 10 years, even after you terminate the contract. Even after we terminate the contract, we need to keep those records for 10 years after the financial. But there's section 24 that is saying ongoing due diligence. What does ongoing due diligence mean? Ongoing due diligence means this. It means that we will get to this model. We will look at your expected versus actual. We will look at your geographical location, just in case. We will look at all the risk factors and see whether the risk factors are the same or they have changed. We will look at all the risk factors in terms of types of customers and see whether these risk factors have changed. Now, if we come here, if we see this financial products and services risk assessment model, you see that there are a lot of products here. I may have come into the bank seeking trade finance activities, but over the years, I can access private banking activities. I can access other products of the bank. It simply means that every after 12 months to 18 months, the bank needs to again go through the risk assessment model in each KYC file, meaning each customer must have this risk. Each KYC file must have a risk assessment model for the customer that is updated every 12 to 18 months. That is what ongoing due diligence is all about. That way, we will understand if you have gotten into illegal wildlife trade or not. We will understand if you have gotten into the business of human trafficking or not. Our job is just to blow the whistle, to inform the financial intelligence center that we suspect to file a suspicious transaction report. Now, with insurance, there is ability to hold funds. We will rate the product on the ability to hold funds. If you can hold funds and the customer can access those funds, high risk. The customer anonymity, some insurance products allow deposit and payments by third parties. Those are high risk scenarios. So we will take these two factors and we will risk them as such, and they go into the customer type risk assessment as we saw earlier. Correspondent banking relationships, domestic correspondent banking relationship means Bank A comes to open up an account at Indo-Zambia Bank for different purposes. Now we want to understand the ultimate beneficial owner. If it's Atlas Mara opening up a bank account at Indo-Zambia Bank, we need to understand the ultimate beneficial owner of Atlas Mara. And we carry out a risk assessment on the ultimate beneficial owner. And if they are deemed high risk, then the entity itself, we rate it a high risk here. Now, the purpose of the account, if the account is used for proprietary funds or client funds, or the funds are commingled, we will rate them as such. And if we need an AML compliance policy from them, we assess it for adequacy, and then if it's not adequate, we will inform them that we need to up there again. They need to submit something that is adequate before we can open up that account. If we have already opened that account, we need to ask them to submit a compliance policy that is adequate. Now, what we will inform you of that is those 16 sections of the anti-money laundering CFTP policy as according to FIC regulations. Now, we have these three factors when it comes to ultimate beneficial ownership, and we rate the product in that sense. With foreign correspondent accounts, of course, a bank in Tanzania, another country comes at Indo-Zambia and opens up an account. The issue of UBO comes up. The issue of AML compliance policy comes up. The issue of geographical location comes up. And the purpose of account comes up. And with those four risk factors, we sort of get an average risk score, and that would feed into the customer risk assessment. With US dollar drafts, we will want to understand the issuer's geographical location. We will want to understand the compliance policy of the issuer, and with these two risk factors, we will come to an average risk rating of the program. With electronic banking is deemed high risk, period. So we go to 5. However, we are just putting an added geographical location factor here. But really, all electronic banking products are rated high risk because of the risk of cyber hacking and all that kind of business. With the risk of funds transfers, whether it's electronic funds transfer, whether it's wire transfer, there is the actual thing of frequency of the transactions and the volume of the transactions. So when we have low transaction volume, that is low risk. High transaction volume on wire transfers and all that stuff. So by this, I mean, so some of your customers, depending on the nature of their transactions, I mean, they're always doing uh, high frequency, high volume transactions. Then you're going to rate that kind of product in this case. And of course, you have the customer relationships. When these monies are moving to, when you are assisting to move this money to, or when you are receiving this money on behalf of your clients, sometimes all parties are your customers, sometimes only one party is your customer, and sometimes all parties may not be your customers. You will rate them as we see on the chart. Now, there is also geographical location, where the monies are going to or where the monies are coming from. If they are high-risk jurisdictions, the kind of rating that you go there is as such. Now, with these three components, you will arrive at a rating of funds transfers. With loans, okay, we have a scenario where the source of repayment, of course, that kind of information you will get it at the time the customer is applying for the loan, but you also have loan-related parties like guarantors, for example, who is guaranteeing the loan for this person. And the reason why guarantors come into play, because we want to risk assess the guarantors as well. If the guarantors are deemed high-risk customers, then we will rate this as such. Now, source of repayment and loan-related parties, we will rate that. With trade finance, we want to understand the ultimate beneficial owner. We want to understand the geographical locations of importer and exporter. And then with these two things, we come. With private banking, there is an element of the compensation of the staff. Reason, this is sometimes called VIP banking. Now, with VIP banking, what happens is that you may have Christopher Katongo come to open up an account in there. You'll be starstruck, and therefore, at onboarding, he may not provide all the information. He may say, I will provide the information later, and maybe because you are starstruck, you may overlook certain practices that are required of you as a staff member in the VIP banking unit. So we will want to motivate you, whether it's Christopher Katongo or not, we want to motivate you to adhere to the bank's practices in terms of AML CFT. So we will compensate you, we will give you a bonus actually for. So this is international best practice. So with ultimate beneficial ownership, we also want to understand if it's a legal entity that is accessing VIP banking. We want to understand the UBO. With these two entities, we will rate private banking as such. Now, there may be more factors that you want to think of. You can add them. Okay. There may be more bank products that are offered by the bank. There are new bank products all the time, and they must be here. So this is at the point where we say that any new product that is introduced in the bank, compliance must have a say, because they're going to have to find a way of rating it in terms of AML CFT. Now, we have looked at risk. We have looked at internal controls for different types of traffickers or customers. We have now internal controls for different types of products. Now, let us look at the risk assessment for human trafficking. Now, remember, the easiest slide on human trafficking, where we said that victims of trafficking usually are destined to certain certain industries wherever they are being trafficked to. These industries may be domestic work, construction, fishing, agriculture, and so on and so forth. So, okay, what we want to do when we are risk assessing for these customers at onboarding or during the customer relationship time, we want to understand uh, the industry from where they are coming from. Now, here is this. Usually, victims of human trafficking are recruited by HR agencies. These companies, they can come to Indozambia and say, we are an HR recruiting agency. We can actually provide you with X amount of workers. Okay, you can engage that company to provide you with X amount of workers. This company can just go to some village and traffic those workers, bring them to Lusaka, either with using deception, those means that we talked about, either through force or deception or anything. They come here, we can get their documentation, we can house them in some poor facility, and there they will be working for Indo-Zambia Bank. And when Indo-Zambia Bank pays us this amount of money as a professional fee, we will just go, and we can't even pay them anything if we want. Or we can just give them small amounts of money to be sending to their villages and so on. So this is what has been found out to be happening in Qatar during the World Cup time. They have this thing also in the Arab world called the kafala system, meaning maids are recruited from Africa, from Asia, and taken there. Once they arrive there, your passport is taken away from you, meaning you can't travel back to your country without risking jail, first of all. Two, you will have no access to a phone. Three, they won't even pay you a salary. They'll be told, you'll be told your salary will be paid at the end of your contract, that the money is being, they will just give you subsistence money, the kind of money that you're going to need for your own personal upkeep and so on and so forth. Now, we are seeing this happening. It can happen. It does happen in the African scenario, as a matter of fact. Well, you'll find, uh, uh, if you remember, some time back, a couple of years back, drivers at Dangote Cement downed their tools, and it was all over the media. They were saying that we went to complain to the Dangote officials, Dangote Cement officials, and we were told that Dangote does not employ them. They are employed by an HR agency, so they can go to complain to their HR agency. They were complaining of poor working conditions. They were complaining of low pay. So you understand that the professional service providers in the form of HR agencies are mainly, or have been cited as, the culprits in the human trafficking form. Whereas they may not see it as human trafficking because they are just in the business of making money. However, the law disagrees with them, and the Financial Action Task Force is. So, in Zambia, we have the anti-human trafficking law that is making that illegal. And in Zambia, the anti-trafficking law under section 19, it's talking about money laundering from human trafficking. And because it's talking about money laundering from human trafficking, we are obligated to institute anti-money laundering laws against human trafficking. And because the Financial Action Task Force has recommended international best practices that financial institutions should focus on this. So two things here. Let us look at the industries let us look at professional service providers in the form of HR agencies. And also, within the industries, for example, if this is an HR agency that says it has deployed 100 people to the agricultural industry and this is its payroll, okay, we may want to cite that as a high risk. The payroll is so small in comparison to what we expect the agricultural sector should pay its workers, for example. So this is where the risk assessment has to focus on. So the entity may be a politically exposed person, in this case a legal person. It may be uh, a legal person in terms of a business entity, professional service provider, cashing. It doesn't matter. What matters is we must look at the industry, we must look at the payroll, and then we must look at and so on and so forth. Now, with respect to illegal wildlife trade, remember, ultimate beneficial owner is very important. With ultimate beneficial owner, there is a point where we discussed that we need ultimate beneficial owner, they must be an individual or individuals. With ultimate beneficial owner, we are not talking about an entity to say company X is owned by company Y. No, we want to understand which individual ultimately. Now, with the individual, him or herself, will want to understand the honesty, integrity, the honesty, integrity, and reputation. And we understand with integrity and reputation what we are looking at, whether this individual has been sort of convicted of a financial crime, whether this person has been investigated but not convicted, in which case that would be moderate risk, or whether this person has been convicted of a financial crime, in that case. So if this entity is a legal person, okay, then we will put that on a higher alert. That would be high risk, and Section 19 of the Financial Intelligence Center Act has to kick in there. So you see, we've highlighted honesty, integrity, and reputation for UBOs of legal entities here. That we will have to check that. We will have also got to check the sector. Now, if these guys are in the business of trading wildlife, even if they are legal entities, because we have seen several areas of vulnerabilities where illegal wildlife and products can come into the legal supply chain and ultimately go to the source, to the destination. So the supply chains are so porous that we cannot, it's very hard to establish what is legal and what is not. So what we need to do is to establish the nature of the business and or industry at onboarding, and if related to wildlife trade, designate as a high risk. Because of the nature of the porousness of the supply chains, anybody dealing in any institution dealing in wildlife trade, in our own professional opinion, must be designated high risk, because we must and apply Section 19 of the Financial Intelligence Center Act in that case. Now, also we must conduct customer due diligence on, customer due diligence, of course, by this we mean risk assessing the ultimate beneficial owners, and if UBOs are established to be high risk, then we apply enhanced due diligence procedures according to the Financial Intelligence Center Act. Now, I've spoken too much about Section 19 of the Financial Intelligence Center Act. I want to, let me just get it from my file and I read it to you before we end this. So, what Section 19 of the Financial Intelligence Center Act is saying? It's saying that A reporting entity, meaning Indo-Zambia Bank, shall have appropriate risk management systems to identify customers whose activities may pose a high risk of money laundering and financing of terrorism, and shall exercise enhanced identification, verification, and ongoing due diligence procedures with respect to such customers. B. Determine if a customer or beneficial owner is a high-risk customer, and if so, obtain approval from senior management of Indo-Zambia Bank before establishing a business relationship with the customer, or later, as soon as an existing customer is identified. So you will see that with high-risk customer, a branch cannot make that decision because Section 19B 1 of the Financial Intelligence Center Act is saying that approval, senior management must approve. So now, at onboarding, you may establish a customer is high-risk customer, or during the course of the relationship, you may come to find out this is a high-risk customer. It means that senior management must approve that. So what does this mean? This means that in the management committee meetings, we must see such minutes saying that we have approved this. That's what a regulator would do, to find out whether management approved this high-risk account or not. So any account that deals with wildlife trade, whether they have a ZAWA license or not, they must be designated high-risk. And if they're designated high risk, it simply means that senior management must approve. These are the practices. 2, take reasonable measures to identify the source of wealth and funds and other assets of the customer. The only way you will do this is to obtain annual reports or audited financial statements. Provide increased and ongoing monitoring of customer and the business relationship to prevent money laundering and so on and so forth. So with international best practices, it goes into telling you other kinds of things that you need to do, the enhanced due diligence things like tell us the largest number of your customers, tell us. So as I'm saying, the notes to the audited financial statements largely will provide you with all that kind of information there that are required for you in terms of enhanced due diligence. So risk mitigation per se, okay, now that you have risk assessed, now that you have the internal controls, of course, with the governance, with risk assessment, the board has got a role to play, senior management has got a role to play, and of course, the entire staff of the bank has got a role to play. Now, with the governance or the board is looking at the bigger picture. They've got a bird's eye view of the bank and what's going on. So there is the vision and strategy of the bank. Now, they have to institute a risk culture in the bank in terms of all the risks the banks that are faced with, including these risks that we are talking about, risks associated with money laundering from human trafficking, risks associated with money. Now that culture must be there. The issue of building risk culture in the bank, or the issue of risk culture, is a topic for another day. It's actually, yeah. Now, they are looking at enterprise risk management framework of the bank as a whole. So the role of the board is to make sure that they design the policies, the procedures, and the processes for compliance risk. Policies, procedures, and processes for human trafficking and money laundering. Policies and so on and so forth, and for illegal wildlife trade. So the first line of defense, of course, we have the policies, processes and procedures are the first line of defense, and of course this is a responsibility, primary responsibility of the board, although the board is responsible for everything in the bank, but who writes those policies? Uh, this is the bank. Now, with respect to the second line of defense, it is the risk department and the compliance department. Meaning that they must ensure that compliance with section 16 to 17 of the Act uh, at all levels of the institution. They must ensure they are responsible for preparing and maintaining the risk management framework for it. So risk management framework for AML CFTP means all the documents that informs the practices, including so the second line of defense, compliance department, is responsible for drawing up the policies themselves and giving them to the board for approval, is responsible for making sure that all business lines are sort of adhering to this. All the branches are adhering to the policies, procedures, and processes. And of course, they provide advice to risk owners. Mind you, who is the risk owner of AML CFTP risk at the branch? It's the branch manager. So all the branch managers will receive advice from the second line of defense in terms of how they will need to go about it. All the bankers in the customer relationship supply chain will need to get advice from compliance department with respect to the practices and make sure that, and mind you, compliance is not only, it's not like, how do I want to put this? You are not, it's not about being a police, okay? This is about international best practice. This is about making money for the bank and making sure the bank does not lose money. Of course, internal audit is the third line of defense, where they will do the audit and make sure that everything is in order. Where there are gaps, report on those things and make recommendations in terms of how those gaps are going to be controlled or rectified. So, what this means for the rest of the team is that section 16 to 19 must be adhered to. And of course, what this means also is that this must lead us towards section 19, meaning reporting suspicious transactions, filing suspicious transaction reports with the financial agencies, like that. Now, if there will be any questions with respect to this, you may want to direct them to compliance department, and we will gladly answer those questions in some sort of an question and answer report format. Thanks very much, and thank you for your time.